because the topic of this course, this series of lectures, not only interests me very much, but I also think it has a very high significance within present day discussions on the condition and the possibilities of our world society. When doing some research for this lecture on the net, I found a sign of the academic vitality of this subject in the form of a Center for Post-Secular Studies at London Metropolitan University, led by Mike King. And on his website he says the post-secular means, to start with, a renewed interest in spiritual life, a relaxation of the secular suspicion towards spiritual questions, a spiritual and intellectual pluralism, East and West, and a cherishing of the best in all spiritual traditions while recognizing the repression sometimes inflicted on individuals or societies in the name of religion. And then he adds a list of post-secular contexts, including the new sciences of quantum mechanics, relativity, and chaos and complexity theory, challenging the deterministic, mechanistic, and reductionist worldview, the emerging field of consciousness studies, transpersonal psychology from Jung to Wilber, sections of postmodern thinking, section of Christian theology, the creative arts, and mystical and ecological approaches towards nature. Well, this is kind of a miscellaneous list of contexts, and it indicates the inherent vagueness of the topic of the post-secular, the wideness of the fields and questions involved. But I think upon closer inspection we can discern three core elements or three core problems addressed within post-secular perspectives. In the first place, on the level of personal orientations of individuals, the new interest for spirituality, the rise of renewed interest for religion on a pluralistic, open base, new connections between Western and Eastern traditions, the return of religion in the public sphere, as it is called. In the second place, I think the post-secular perspectives involve, on the level of social theory and the social sciences in general, a radical critique of the supposed neutrality of secularism. It's like whiteness, which in Western countries was not considered as a color until recently, so secularism was not considered as a worldview in the mainstream social theory of the past century. Because secularism was the natural condition of modern societies, and in that perspective, religion and spirituality were something which would disappear sooner or later out of Western societies or only occupy a marginal position. So post-secular perspectives have highlighted the very specific presuppositions, which very specific notion of progress, and which very specific vision on politics of secularism in general as a presupposition of the social sciences. And in the third place, and connected with this second point, I think post-secularism, post-secular perspectives, and speculations about the post-secular society point towards the possibility of alternative global frameworks for the development of our world society. So on a global political level, it is no longer the case that we only have the model of Western modernization, of the modern state and of the market on the basis of neoliberal views of the individual, but however controversial, there are alternative views in which religion plays a very prominent and strong role also on the political level. Well, these 3 points already illuminate the measure in which post-secular perspectives are controversial. They are highly controversial. They lead to lots of heated debates, and to illustrate sort of debates, these going on between the secularists and the more post-secular minded elements within the Dutch humanist movement. Of course, the University of Humanistics, where I work, is part of this debate. And just to sketch the complexity of it, I go a little bit into what we try to do at the University of Humanistics also, because in the third part of my lecture, I will come back to that. In fact, we define humanistics as focusing on the interface between, on the one hand, questions of the meaning of life, what gives your life vitality, what feeds you, what feeds your eagerness to live, what feeds your positive emotions, as Rosie says in her book Transformations. And on the other hand, questions of humanization and of social power structures. For example, this day in the Volkskrant, a research report made clear that in our society, people with very little education live about 60 years in good health and in a spirited way, whereas people with high education keep up their high spirits until 70. So there's 10 years difference between the possibilities for living a meaningful, a vital, a interested life. So there's a very simple but clear indication of the interface between chances of people for leading a meaningful life on the one hand and social power structures and inequality structures on the other hand. And at humanistics we try to illuminate this interface also because we believe that the most vital, the most involved, the most rich forms of living open up when people are able to participate politically in the development of a more humane society. So we think that this interface is not only scientifically, philosophically and ethically very interesting, but also has a high political significance. Now we do this from a very open perspective on humanism, on social theory, and on spirituality, and this leads to very hard and vehement critique from the secular wing within Dutch humanism. We are much too postmodern for them. We are much too plural. We have, for example, an Islamic professor, Abu Zaid, whose work we find very important. And most of all, we are much too tolerant to spiritual perspectives. We have even dissertations on spirituality. We do research on spirituality. We have teachers in our midst who teach out of their own spiritual inspiration. And for the secular humanists, this is terrible. I think we are completely off the mark. We are unscientific. We are not rational. We do not represent the venerable tradition of Western humanism. And in fact, a lot of them plead that we should be closed down. So, post-secular perspectives are already on this micro level of our very regulated and orderly Dutch society highly controversial. And this is no wonder, because in the eyes of secularist thinkers, post-secularism threatens three core values of modernity. On the first place, it threatens political freedom. The return of religion revives all the Westphalian fears of modern societies. The historical renewal in the 17th century, where religion was relegated to the private domain and where the state was considered as a space of neutrality. So this is of course the first point where secularists get very itchy with everything concerning the return into the political sphere of religion and spirituality. In the second place, they see there a major threat for scientific rationality, for the notions of objective knowledge and of truth as a prerequisite for a well-ordered society. And in the third place, they deplore the popularity of spiritual and plurally lives and personal judgment and personal fulfillment. They deplore this as a return of superstition and of prejudice and of narrow-mindedness and of blah blah, vaag onzin in Dutch. So, on the political level, on the scientific level, and on the level of notions of personal fulfillment, post-secular perspectives are threatening the core of modern secular humanism. And I think here we can see the great importance and the severe limitations of post-secular perspectives. And with this I go to the second and the biggest part of my introduction. I think the great importance of post-secular perspectives against the background of these suspicions from secularist thinking hinges on two main points. The first point is that post-secular perspectives involve a fundamental critique of the privatization of worldviews and of religious and spiritual perspectives and concomitant moral values in modern societies. And this privatization implies and confirms the neutrality of the state and of all these state apparatuses, as Althusser said, and thus upholds a notion of politics which completely blocks out of view the daily reality of postmodern and post-industrial societies, as analyzed, for instance, by Foucault, by Rawls, and by many others. They block out, I think, that political power is exerted in present-day societies not primarily by way of the official political institutions, but in the complex interplay between the state and the market and all highly political notions of individuality and of actorship and of a meaningful life which are produced and stabilized in this interplay. More in particular, I think this notion of the neutrality of the state and the concomitant privatization of worldviews and values completely blocks from sight the central role of science and technology in the production and reproduction of the dominant political order. And this production process involves both the social sciences and the natural sciences and embodies, we could say, the great unfold of secular modernism. And the political productiveness of the social sciences and the natural sciences in modern societies is the great insult of secularism, and post-secular perspectives try to highlight this insult. Well, of course, these are well-known perspectives, but I just recall some of them for you. For the social sciences, these productive processes have been analyzed in great detail by post-structuralists in terms of truth power, but also by feminists and by post-colonial thinkers. And for the natural sciences and the role of technology in shaping postmodern identities, this process has been analyzed in detail by social constructivists, by feminist thinkers like Donna Haraway, and by sociologists such as Gibbons and Nowotny. And in this context, I particularly like the distinction between two forms of knowledge production introduced by Gibbons and Nowotny, Mode 1 and Mode 2 respectively. And I think this can really help to analyze some of the complexities of the post-secular perspective. Mode 1 science, as you will recall, is the name they give to academic science, to science which is in fact monodisciplinary and which is controlled by the scientific community in the form of the top scientific journals where it's decided which papers are worthwhile and interesting and which will be rejected. So the scientific community is the highest authority, and the central problems which are researched are directed internally, are decided upon internally by these different scientific communities, and this results in what we could call experimental and operational progress. One of the very important aspects of Mode 1 science as it has developed during the last 3 centuries is its operational productiveness. Its results in new experimental techniques and new operations, new technological operations involving control of natural processes. For example, the revolution in biology is a very good example of this. This is based on a new theoretical model, which then is connected, which then makes possible new experimental searches, which directs the attention to certain operative possibilities, and then develops over the decades into new ways of manipulating molecules and even at the lower levels, and thus giving rise to genetic technology. So it's very important, and I think Gibbons and many others don't do that so much, to highlight the operative productiveness of Mode 1 science. And then this operative productiveness is of course very important for the other form of science they distinguish, which they call Mode 2, very original. And Mode 2 is geared to the solution of practical problems. So there the problems researched are not defined by the scientific community internally, but are defined in all kinds of very complex processes with economic and political powers. This kind of research is interdisciplinary and it involves many stakeholders. And this is very interesting because then what is judged as good knowledge, as worthwhile, interesting, productive knowledge, is no longer the province of the scientific community, which can then internally decide on this, but it becomes the result of conflictual power relations involving interests and values. A very simple example of this, we do research at the University of Utrecht into the development of genomics, and one of the topics is the massive investments in the prolonging of life by genetical manipulation. And when you look at the worldwide investments in scientific research in this field, then you see that 80% of the resources are channeled into health problems of rich Americans, and rich old Americans to be more precise. And here the big market and the big worries and the profit is to be found. So this Mode 2 science is very much geared towards health problems of old Americans and their dreams of becoming immortal. And whereas other problems on a worldwide scale, for example malaria, where also very productive research will be going to get only 2% of the research market. So here you see how a whole social and worldwide complex of power relations directly steers the development of the scientific field of genomics. And I think this perspective allows us to broaden the analysis of truth power, of disciplining and normalization, as we know it from post-structuralism and feminism, and also incorporates and allows us to also incorporate the importance of technological and of operative power and connect it with analysis focusing on processes of disciplining and normalization. For example, in the Dutch public healthcare, the GGZ, there is during the last decades, we see an interweaving of, on the one hand, a biological paradigm which justifies itself as Mode 1 science, and which has a very specific operative productiveness in the form of new pharmaceutical means to intervene in all kinds of psychic problems, and all kinds of normalization and disciplining as analyzed, for example, by the Foucauldians. And this is a very interesting example because this is justified as a form of Mode 1 science, but it's realized completely as a Mode 2 science. There is a very heavy influence, for example, from pharmaceutical industries in the financing of all kinds of conferences and research projects in psychic healthcare. So at this point, I think the first reason I want to highlight for the importance of post-secular perspectives can be made very clearly visible, especially the critique of the privatization of worldviews and values in modern societies, because the importance of post-secular perspectives hinges, in my eyes, in the first place, on the elimination of the central role of values and of competing worldviews on the level of professional practices in knowledge-intensive organizations, and thus the elimination of the sub-politics, we could say, going on in these organizations. And for example, again, an example taken from GGZ, the healthcare directed at psychic problems, there is a fierce struggle going on there between, on the one hand, biological paradigm, which is associated with an individualizing and depoliticizing social perspective, and on the other hand, all kinds of alternative forms of treatment. For example, I have a psychiatrist trying to do a PhD on an experiment with mindfulness as a way of dealing with psychic problems of patients in the GGZ, rooted in Buddhism and linked with a completely different perspective, not the individual with a body which can be technically remedied by highly trained specialists, but patients as citizens embedded in the life world and more interested in rehabilitation, in getting back in a social network where they can respect themselves, than in abstract forms of psychic health. So here we see, on the level of this knowledge-intensive organization, a mode 2 science struggle going on, a political struggle, I would say, a sub-political struggle between two different paradigms with regard to psychic health. And here, I think, we clearly see the political dimension which post-secular perspectives potentially involve, and also the political dimension of new forms of spirituality. And I think it's very fruitful could be very fruitful to develop the important efforts of, for example, Michel Foucault, but also by Rosa Braidotti in this direction. And in the work of Foucault, we have this strange bifurcation between, on the one hand, this analysis of truth power, of disciplining, of normalization, and then at the end of his life, his new interest in the ethics and aesthetics of life, which was very much inspired also by Hadot. And Hadot is one of the French philosophers who has tried to make clear that Hellenistic philosophy has to be understood in the first place as a form of spirituality, as a form of developing a philosophical stance towards concrete existential and moral problems, not an epistemological endeavor, but an existential endeavor. And I think Foucault has also connected this with practices of freedom. This has an important political aspect for him, but he has never concretized this perspective. He has not made any efforts to connect his advocacy of an ethics of life and an aesthetics of life with these practices of truth power. In fact, he has only advocated, I think, to disconnect yourself from these practices, to disconnect yourself from truth power, but has not made the reconnection. What could be the relevance of spirituality and of ethics of life for a repoliticization of professional practices in knowledge-intensive organizations? And I think Braidotti's work on the nomadic ethics also has this potential highly political import where it connects an analysis of postmodern society with a plea for nomadic ethics and a specific form of spirituality geared towards sustainability. But I think both the analysis of Foucault and of Braidotti have to be connected much more explicitly with concrete professional discourses and with concrete forms of mode to knowledge production to be really politically effective. And this brings me to the second reason why post-secular perspectives have a great importance, but also to the first limitation of these perspectives. And this reason is connected with the first, but points in a different direction, because I think we can say that post-secular perspectives point towards another completely different notion of knowledge and of insight. A notion completely different from the established notion of objective knowledge and scientifically sound insight as developed during the last centuries. And this involves knowledge and insights with regard to existential and moral questions, not articulated in theories, but primarily articulated in narratives. In religious and spiritual narratives, in literature, in films, and directed in many cases at a specific kind of questions which I have designated as slow questions, to distinguish them from the fast technological fixes promised, for instance, by biological psychiatry or by all kinds of scientifically based forms of producing happiness. Slow questions involve the confrontation with limitations, with the lack of control, with the impossibility to find a technical fix for example, a relational crisis or the loss of a beloved, or for problems involving your own health or those of others, or problems involving injustice and power. And these slow questions have to be worked through. They cannot be solved in a technical way on the basis of objective knowledge. And for this form of working through, inspiration is extremely important. Spiritual food to be gleaned from literature, from spiritual traditions, from stories of others in your surroundings. And these slow questions also involve very pressing moral problems, because when the technical specialists can't help you anymore, it's very important that you are not left alone, that you experience some form of solidarity in your surroundings and not people. When people get into deep shit, it becomes clear who are their real friends and who not. Those who are able and willing to stay with them and to endure the problems they are confronted with, to help them, to take care of them, etc. And those for whom this is too much, those who lean back, take a distance, or have other more important things to do. So the confrontation with slow questions also confronts you very much with moral dilemmas, both when you are confronted yourself as in your surroundings. And here again, spiritual traditions, religious traditions, literary traditions can help us to enhance our moral sensibility, to connect us with the complexities of the ethical and moral complexities of our lives, and to search for ways of dealing with these problems which contribute to our self-respect and the respect of others. And I think it is very important to see that this post-secular perspectives in this way point to an alternative notion of knowledge and of insight and of learning. And that this also is one of the reasons for the deep discomfort secularists and their deep anxieties that modern rationality and the concomitant notions of objectivity and control get to be undermined. Because they feel that there's something there, I think. And what is there is in a deep way different, because, to speak with Lyotard, it does not involve primarily activity, but it involves primarily passivity. It involves transcendent values and perspectives on transcendence in which the individual is placed in the position of a passive receiver instead of the active doer and maker. And Lyotard has made very extensive and very interesting analysis of this in terms of the sublime in discussion with Kant. And in his book On Just, he goes explicitly into this internal relation between the experience of transcendence and visions on transcendence on the one hand, and the fact that you're no longer the sender but the receiver of something which cannot be researched or objectified in terms of modern rationality, but something which has a deep existential and moral significance, so which can serve as a form of inspiration for moral action. So here we get a notion of insight which is existentially relevant and morally relevant, and which is fed by narrative sources instead of by theories. And this is a second very important perspective opened up by post-secular perspectives, because, of course, it is this transcendence and these existential and moral questions and the possible source of inspiration for them, which are expelled from professional organizations, which are expelled from social science, which are expelled from dominant notions of professional quality. They are repressed in the markets and in the different state apparatuses. So I think this is the second important point where post-secular perspective really have to tell something new, apart from the critique of the privatization of values and worldviews connected with modern societies. But here also my first point of critique starts, because I think in most post-secular perspectives this is connected with the return of religion and of spirituality in the public sphere, that is to say in traditional political institutions. And it's not connected with this sub-political process of production of normalcy and of individualization and of normalization. It's not connected with these professional practices, with professional knowledge in organizational production processes. And I think there's also there are of course deep reasons for this, because in modern societies religion and spirituality have developed themselves mostly apart from modern science and from professional discourses. There are also a second reason, and this brings me to my second point of critique, or to a second limitation of exhibited by many post-secular perspectives, and this is that they involve a notion of transcendence and of transcendent values, but do not distinguish clearly between different forms of transcendence. And in the program alluded to by Rosi Bertotti, the Future of Religious Past, we have done a research project focusing on horizontal transcendence. And one of the important premises of this research program is that many religious perspectives, but also many spiritual perspectives, explicitly or implicitly are based on a vertical notion of transcendence, where a transcendent entity or a transcendent being or transcendent values are allotted a higher status, are posited somewhere up there commanding respect, commanding obedience, and being the most fundamental aspect or entity of our world. And thus these notions of vertical transcendence are in many cases connected with vertical hierarchies between those close to this transcendent entity and those who have to be initiated or have to be educated in this tradition. So there is an unreflected vertical power dimension in many religious and spiritual perspectives. And one of the, for me, most interesting possibilities of these post-secular perspectives is that at many places people are developing new articulations of transcendence, which we designate as horizontal transcendence. And we have borrowed this concept from Lucia Garay, who has introduced this in her work in the 80s, and we have elaborated it and given it in fact two central notions. On the one hand, horizontal transcendence involves transcendent values, but then at the horizon. So, het de Vries says with Levinas, this is characterized by the notion of adieu. The more close you come à Dieu, the farther you get away from him. A fundamental Derridian thought. So there is this horizon of transcendent values, and behind this horizon you posit a transcendent entity, a transcendent future, a transcendent possible world, a transcendent cosmic spirit, or whatever. But when you try to reach over the horizon and say what is there and know what it is, you lose it. So the first notion of horizontal transcendence is that you acknowledge the necessary distance, the necessary difference between your intuition, your view, your hope, your vision of a transcendent horizon on the one hand, and your articulation of it on the other hand. Your articulation is necessarily limited and distorting and not adequate to that which you want to point to. So you can never say, I represent, or I know, or I can tell you what is there. You can point to it. And that is the second meaning of the concept of horizontality here, because your own articulation of these transcendent horizons and what's involved there is necessarily limited. You need dialogue, critique, fruitful friction with other perspectives. So there, the notion of horizontal refers to a horizontal dialogical dynamics, to a plurality of articulations of transcendence. And I think many spiritual and religious perspectives are not yet clear enough about this distinction between vertical and horizontal transcendence, but to be relevant for professional practices, to be relevant as a countervailing power in the context of knowledge-intensive organizations, they have to get rid of vertical notions of transcendence, because it's impossible to envelop these practices in one moral language game and in one set of rituals and one set of meditative practices that can only be done and explored from a radically pluralist perspective. So this brings me to my conclusion, and I have given this the title Towards a Complex Enlightenment. And this is the direction I'm exploring at the moment in my research. And a complex enlightenment is based on a very tense combination of the two big enlightenment traditions which humanity has developed in its history. On the one hand, the notion of modern enlightenment, modern rationality, science, scientific rationality, objective knowledge, technological control, and all concomitant values and practices. And on the other hand, the inner enlightenment, the traditions of inner enlightenment and of moral inspiration embodied in the great religious and spiritual traditions, but also, I think, a central theme of the great literature and poetry of our world society. So, what I'm fantasizing about, but not only fantasizing, is how can we move beyond the restorative move, which in some versions of post-secularism is clearly there. At first it was science and modern rationality, and now religion and spirituality take over. And we see the limitations of modern science, and in fact this is now degraded to a second position, and the moral and spiritual enlightenment is this which can help us to a better society. Well, I think this is a very bad move, and a very naive move. It's just the same game with different players. And instead of that, I think we are standing before the challenge to develop dense combinations, complex combinations between these two forms of enlightenment and concomitant traditions, and this involves a transformation of both these traditions. And I think the main arena where this transformation is taking place has to be found on the level of these Mode 2 practices, on the level of knowledge-intensive organizations, and on the level of professional language games and forms of expertise. Because here we find in the practice of knowledge-intensive organizations already this entanglement of technical knowledge, of rational technique, of social science, of highly sophisticated forms of technology on the one hand, and on the other hand, all kinds of conflicts between people involving power, involving dependency, involving injustice, but also involving cooperation, inspiration, care, responsibility, and other moral virtues. And to make this a little bit more concrete, I would like in conclusion to refer to a practical project we are developing at the University of Humanistics in the fields of healthcare and of social work, but also in educational settings, where professionals are increasingly discontent with the new forms of racial control which are pressed upon them not only by the government but also by insurance companies and by others, where the space for professionals to find context-specific and individualized solutions for the problems they are confronted with is narrowed down more and more because they are confronted with all these forms of bureaucratic control and regulations and protocols, etc. And this is quite an interesting field because what we see is a depolarization in healthcare and in education and in social work and in other related sectors between two logics. And we have called this the logic of the lamp poles and the logic of the campfires. And the logic of the lamp poles is in fact the logic of maximum transparency, of rational enlightenment, of total control of all processes, of rational design, and of making visible objectifying everything which is happening, and thus being able to make the total production process transparent. And an important characteristic of this logic of the lamp poles is that it's centrally controlled. The lamp poles are directed and devised by management, by the higher levels of the organizations, and they are used especially to light up, to make completely transparent the professional practices lower in the organization. And the second important characteristic of this logic of the lamp poles is that it has no inherent limitations. You can always devise higher lamp poles, you can intensify the light, you can devise new forms of transparency. For example, in many practices, the scanner is a new technological practice of making visible, of objectifying, of quantifying all kinds of professional processes. And this logic of the lamp poles, and this topic really fascinates me, inherently produce its own darkness. There's always a limit to what is illuminated by these forms of techniques geared at maximum transparency, and it is in this darkness that the professionals among themselves and the clients light up little campfires. And these are answering to a completely different logic, because these campfires are temporal. They emerge and then they disappear again, and they are individualized. They are not from the organization, they are from persons, from individuals who sit down, who smoke a cigarette, who have some coffee together, or who just look at each other for 10 seconds in a meeting in which their boss is again doing his usual stupid tricks, and they look at each other when he doesn't look, and look up at the ceiling and have a kind of understanding which gives a little light in the darkness of such a meeting. So these campfires are decentralized, they are emergent, and what is exchanged there is not information but stories. People share stories and emotions at the campfires. They show something of their own personal experiences, and thus there's place for humor, but it also place for jesting and for joking and for confronting each other. These campfires also give the possibility not to be visible. You show of yourself what you want, but you don't have to be transparent. You can lean back and again a little bit in the dark. So at the campfires there's also place for the mysterious, for what we cannot completely understand, for what we cannot control, for that which you can point at, but do not understand completely. So there's also place for space for the slow questions and the confrontation with all those elements of our lives which we cannot illuminate with the logic of the lamp poles. Now, what we see in many organizations where we work is a deep polarization between these two logics, where the management and the bestuurder are completely involved in expanding this logic of the lamp poles, and where the professionals are sabotaging this as much as they can, or trying to get out of the light and revert to their campfires. And here I think new connections are needed, and this complex enlightenment I'm talking about has as its practical field these organizations and the new connections between these two logics, which I think are necessary. And here also we can see the sub-political relevance of post-secular perspectives, because it is at the campfires that the people also present their own worldviews, where they come with their stories, where their histories and their cultural backgrounds have a legitimate space to appear, and where they also exchange stories about their professional experience and what goes wrong and what goes good in their work. And I think that the sub-political and wider political relevance of this post-secular perspective can be found exactly here, where we can see that the critique of power relations, that personal inspiration, that moral qualities have a prime significance for organizing well, for creating organizations in which people are not only dehumanized or estranged, but can work together in a fruitful and productive way. I have to take some water. And to illustrate this with a last remark, what happens at these campfires is a different form of enlightenment. This fire of these campfires, of the narratives, of people showing something of themselves, of moral bonds growing between people, of real forms of critique and confrontation, of inspirational stories. This makes lighten up faces. This is not a kind of light. It is what makes, what lights up faces of people. It is what lights up faces in relief or in joy, but also in understanding, in illumination. There's another sense of lumen, of light involved here. Yes, I understand now that I did something to you which was not right, but you made this clear to me, and we can go on together now on a better base. I have understood something very much important. And so here also, this lightening up of faces and this illumination is connected with inner enlightenment, with the way in which people develop themselves in an existential and moral sense. This is connected with what Foucault calls the ethics of life, and what I think Rosie Braidotti is trying to articulate in her nomadic ethics and in her own form of spirituality. So, and here I conclude, I think that this kind of enlightenment has to be connected with professional processes of production and of organizing and of reorganizing our prime institutions and our prime organizations, in view of the fact that at the moment our world society is very badly organized, that we are very badly organized in a perspective of sustainability, of economic exchange, etc., and that we do not need to leave behind the rationality of the modern enlightenment. We need that rationality very much, but it has to be combined in all kinds of tenseful confrontations with plural and open forms of inner enlightenment.